yield, better quality. And we look back at that, and it just seems obvious to us now. But 50 years ago, in Asia, Latin America, researchers didn't talk in those terms. They talked, if you were going to talk to them, they'd talk to you in specifics about the little whatever they were doing. But you never heard, get production up and improve the quality. I think Bob Chandler got that from George Harrar, who was then Director for Agriculture, Rockefeller Foundation. Because in all of the memos that passed between Ford and Rockefeller, leading to consultations with Philippine authorities, leading to the articles of the establishment of IRRI, that is the single objective for the Institute that is repeated in every document. Higher yield, better quality. And Chandler, on every opportunity that I can recall, staff meetings, seminars, individual conversations, every visitor who came to IRRI on his travels to other countries, he hammered that theme. And he wouldn't let it go. He just beat it to death. And I think it was important because all of us in the first group understood from the very beginning what our job was. And it somehow brought all the disparate disciplines together, focused in on that one single objective. I think it was extremely important. I'll give you an idea of what I'm leading to, because that, by hammering on that, it became absorbed into the minds of everybody. I think he converted everybody. I had a long trip in Asia before getting to IRRI, 1960. And I traveled with Sterling Wertman, something like 5 weeks. Sterling Wertman was then the assistant director for IRRI. He had just moved to the Philippines, living in Manila. And the purpose of that trip was for me to see something about rice in Asia, to learn who the players were in the various institutions and the peoples involved with rice, and if possible, to find potential new staff for this forthcoming IRRI. And parenthetically, we found 3. The very brilliant Panap Ruma, the excellent pathologist SHO, and T.T. Chang. But anyway, in the course of these travels, Sterling and I had a lot of time together, and I asked him one day, Sterling, when you were a pineapple breeder in Hawaii, what was your objective? He said, I had one. He says, it was to produce a round pineapple. I looked at him. It was sort of a sarcastic look, I'm sure. He got a little defensive, and he said, I had to do that because the industry demanded that the pineapple be perfectly cylindrical so it fit in a tin can. All right, I let it go. 6 years later, I knew I had to leave IRRI. When I got there, I identified 4 problems that had to be solved, and I figured by 1966, those problems had been essentially resolved. So I went to the United States, interviewed at universities, went up to Cornell, was offered a plum job, full professor with a much higher salary. I said to him I'd get back to him in 10 days. On the way back to Manila, I stopped in New York. It's a courtesy call, nothing more. New York office of Rockefeller. Sterling was there. Sterling had left IRRI, returned to Hawaii, was pulled out of Hawaii very quickly into New York by George Harrar. George Harrar was then either vice president or president of the foundation. Sterling came in as director for agriculture. And I went into Sterling's office, and he asked me what I was going to do. I said, well, Sterling, maybe I'll go to Cornell. He said, well, wait a minute. Suppose you go back to Colombia. I perked up. He said, yeah, you can start an inter-American rice program. This was 5 years before CIAT was created. So I'd be all alone. Then he said something spectacular. He said, I will evaluate you on your ability to increase national yields of rice. I looked at that man, I could have kissed him. Sterling Wortman progressed from breeding round pineapples to emphasis on production, yield averages. Where did he get that? It was drilled into him by Bob Chandler. So that was one legacy I think was crucial. The second that sticks in my mind is Bob expected everyone at IRRI, whether it be a laborer, a cook, research assistant, secretary, senior staff, he expected the very best, excellence, from each and every member of CIRRI. If everyone were to do his job well, then there were better probabilities of being successful. He could not abide sloppiness. It would drive him hysterical if he saw a piece of paper, scrap paper, floating around the area someplace. He wanted the job done well, to the best of your capabilities. And again, I think that infused throughout the entire institution and brought us all together. Our standards were set high from the very beginning. I'll give you another example of what I'm talking about. Again, it goes back to Sterling Wortman. On this trip that we were taking, I had met Bob Chandler before, but I asked Sterling, what's it like working with Bob Chandler? And he told me, yeah. But he said, there's one thing that's driving me crazy. Sterling was then assistant director of IRRI, I think it was, in Manila. He said, I cannot write a letter on IRRI letterhead and send it to anybody without Bob Chandler reviewing the letter before it goes mailed. Wow. And he's grumbling. Sterling's grumbling about this. And he said, I'd get my letters back. They'd be corrected for syntax, for spelling, for grammar. And he was frustrated. He didn't like that. What's the point? Sterling in those days was not a good writer. I adore Sterling Wortman, but he was not a good writer. Within 5 or 6 years, he became a superb writer. He put out a very good book, and he wrote it himself. Now, how did he learn that? Chandler. Chandler trained him. Chandler could not abide having a letter leave IRRI that had a grammatical error in it, that sort of thing. So I think others will comment in different ways, but for me, those were the two immense legacies that he left, installed and left. I hope he left at IRRI. Certainly the ones that impressed me. How many were there of us? I think maybe 15, 16 researchers. This would be 1961 and through 62. This is discounting Rebecca Pasquale, senior staff, and excellent. Lena Manalo, senior staff, excellent, but they're more into service, and excluding the administration, Joe Drolone and Sterling and Bob. What was left of core, maybe 15, spread out over several disciplines. I particularly enjoyed talking with 3 of them, I think it was, basically. 4, actually. SHO, who was a real source, a valuable source of wisdom, a lot of experience, excellent eyes. And I talked to him about pathology. This is not breeding exactly, but I was trying to learn as much as I could how he sort of related to what I was trying to do. And we got along very well and conversed at length. Felix was another, Panamparuma. His subject was this esoteric, complicated business of the chemistry of flooded soils. What's that got to do with plant breeding? I don't know, nothing. But he was smart, and I just like to talk to Felix. And I cannot put my finger on much that accrued from those conversations into breeding, but I just know I'd like to talk to him, so I have appreciated him very much. Another I thought very highly of, and no one ever hears about him, is Lloyd Johnson, who was the ag engineer and the developer of the experiment station. Real practical guy, knew a lot about machinery. And it was just obvious that we had to be thinking about machinery if we were going to do breeding. Because every time you make a change in a plant, you're going to make some sort of a change in the way the farmer grows it. I had very high respect for those. Let me go back to Tanaka. If I were to go to IRRI tomorrow and give a seminar, and I'd ask the audience, who can tell me about Akira Tanaka? There would be very few who could even identify him. And what was his contribution? Well, he did this really excellent work on the physiology of populations. But I don't remember him for that. I remember him for being a good friend and a conversationalist, a partner, just talking back and forth, because he had all this experience. And his contribution to IRRI is equivalent, in my mind, to that of the breeder. If we do this and this and this, something good might happen. Without Tanaka, I think we would have struggled accepting this whole situation with luck. I think IRRI would have struggled a little longer. Tanaka's not remembered for this. I remember Tanaka. He was a giant. I'll tell you one. It's related to the visit, I think it was about October 1966, of Lyndon Baines Johnson, then President of the United States, to IRRI. But I have to give you the setting first of this story. Somewhere, maybe it was the year previous, Beechel had done a very good job of cleaning up a line that was ultimately selected to result in IRRI. Cleaning it up in the sense of producing fairly uniform seed. I can't remember how much he had, or we had, but that seed was given to Federico Ramos, who was then the station superintendent, I think it was called, for IRRI. And Federico planted out a big area, and I think he harvested about 50 tons of what became IRRI. The bulk of that went to, I'm not sure what it was called. It was part of the Philippine Agriculture, Corn and Rice Bureau or something like that, and I presume for distribution. But I insisted that Federico give me 5 tons. And Orly Santos, who was the assistant to Federico.
He just passed away recently.
Orly passed away. Orly and I packaged that 5 tons. We broke it down into 2,500 2-kilo bags. And I said to Orly or Federico or both of them, I don't recall, we want to give this seed out to any farmer who would come by IRRI and pick it up. No questions asked, no cost involved. And somehow they got the word out. And it was extraordinary. Within a week or 10 days, we exhausted 2,500 bags at 2 kilos each. And I kept a record for a while there of the names of these guys, these farmers, and what province they came from. I don't know if that list still exists, but they came from all over the field. And how they heard about this, I'll never know. But they came in horses, they came in jeepneys, they walked in, they bicycled in, they got there. And we gave them each a bag and told. Well, in retrospect, that was a superb mechanism for disseminating, extending, getting this spread around the Philippines. It worked. Somewhere in late 55, 65 or 66 perhaps, the press got hold of the story of IRRI, and it became quite a thing. Green Revolution. And for a while there, IRRI was inundated with visitors. Prime ministers, kings, queens, high potentates of all sorts and descriptions. And Chandler would announce, so-and-so is coming next week, shape it up. And, you know, white shirt and tie. And then we got the announcement, President Johnson was coming.